Welcome to our post-cabinet press conference. Today we have the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries and the Minister of Finance. The Minister of Energy and Energy Industries will address us now.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your patience. Ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. Thank you, Minister of Communication. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, good afternoon. I came here to deal with 2 points that were covered in the cabinet today and give you an update of it. The first, to inform the population through the media that the Prime Minister will be leading a team to Barbados this weekend, where he will be signing with the Prime Minister of Barbados a memorandum of understanding between the government of Barbados and the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago concerning cooperation in energy development for hydrocarbons that extend across their single maritime boundary. As you are aware, BHP has been making gas discoveries in the northeastern part of Trinidad and Tobago maritime asset. They have drilled a number of successful wells, and some of them are quite close to the Barbadian border. Because of that, both the government of Barbados and the government of Trinidad and Tobago saw it fit to do a memorandum of understanding for joint cooperation in the event that gas reserves are found on the Barbadian side. That will lead to possibly the signing of a unitization treaty between Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados in the not-too-distant future. So the Prime Minister leads a team for that signing ceremony on Saturday at 10 a.m. in Barbados. The team, as I said, is led by the Prime Minister and includes the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Energy, the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, along with some other technocrats from the Ministry of Energy. So that's point number one. The second point, ladies and gentlemen, has to do with Cabinet this morning has approved certain changes in the board and general governance of Trinidad Petroleum Holdings Limited and its subsidiary, particularly Heritage Petroleum Limited. Just to put these decisions in perspective, you will all recall that when we came into office in 2015, it was clear that Petrotrin, as presently constructed at the time, was suffering from some endemic issues, which included a huge debt, high operating costs, and largely they were in an unprofitable state. The first board, which is I would call the Jupiter board, tried their best and did in fact succeed to some extent in trying to put that right. But then came the Lashley report, and the Lashley report clearly identified that Petrotrin, as presently constructed, was unsustainable. Coming out of that Lashley report, it was felt that we need to install a new board. That board was led by Mr. Wilfred Espini, and they were charged with the responsibility to transform the old Petrotrin into a new entity. Ladies and gentlemen, they broke the company up into Trinidad Petroleum Holdings Limited, Petrotrin, which was now responsible for legacy matters, Heritage for exploration and production, Paria for fuel supply and imports, and Garakara, in which the refinery assets were placed in. And as I said, it's common knowledge that Trinidad and Tobago government, through its company, decided to get out of the refining business because, as we all know, that was grossly unprofitable. We think the time has come now where that transformation process has been successfully completed. The board of Trinidad Petroleum Holdings Limited has done an extremely good job. They have restructured the organization. They have transformed it into its new look. And as we speak, the prized possession, so to speak, is the Heritage Petroleum Company, which will be focusing on exploration and production, which by all indications is a profitable part of the business. The refinery, as you all know, is being evaluated for a potential buyer and or lesser, and the outcome of that will be known shortly to the government and the national population. And then Paria had been formed to import fuel to guarantee a reliability of supply in the fuel market. Obviously, Paria could turn out to be a transient company because Paria's long-term existence will depend on the deal that is brokered with regards to the refinery. Heritage, ladies and gentlemen, is really where our focus will lie. The business of exploration and production has been deemed to be profitable. With this new board that we have in place, they will be focusing largely on heritage. Heritage, as I said, has been put in place, and if you saw the papers recently, they have declared substantial profits in the last quarter. However, they still have issues to deal with, and the biggest issue really at Heritage is to get that production up and get that production up as quickly as possible. You'll recall that the Standard & Poor's slight downgrade of Trinidad and Tobago was based on two basic factors. One, what they claim was our inability, they think, to meet our gas supply forecast for 2020 and 2021, and then the inability of Heritage to increase their production at a substantial and a quicker rate. This will be now the focus of Heritage over the coming months and probably a couple of years' time from now. On the plus side of Heritage, it's getting a very good price for its crude. We had always costed Heritage crude as WTI minus $5. As we speak, that crude is now traded on the world market at WTI plus $5 to $7. And that has been the single biggest factor in accounting for the profitability of Heritage. So once we focus on that, I think we are in good stead. So as I said, Heritage will now be focusing on production increase, on accelerated staffing, because if you remember from the restructuring, we had promised the nation that the staffing requirements for Heritage would be around 800 or possibly as high as 1,000 people. I think we are slightly on the slow side in doing that recruitment at the pace in which we should, and we will want to accelerate that pace. But I think we are in a good place, and once we continue to focus on that. So in that context, let me just outline now in some detail the decisions that were taken. Trinidad Petroleum Holdings Limited. The board will now comprise of the following: Mr. Michael Kwamina, Chairman; Mr. Renal Ajuda Singh, Deputy Chairman; Mr. Anthony Chantak, Director; Mr. Joel Harding, Director; Mr. Selwyn Lashley, Director; Mr. Eustace Nancis, Director; and Mr. Newman George, Director. The old Petrotrin, which is a legacy company, the directors are as follows: Mr. Michael Kwamina, Chairman; Mr. Renal Ajuda Singh, Deputy Chairman; Mr. Joel Harding, Member; Mr. Anthony Chantak, Member; Mr. Selwyn Lashley, Member; and Mr. Eustace Nancis, Member. Heritage. That board will now comprise, and this is really, like I said, the key board in terms of the operation: Mr. Michael Kwamina, Chairman; Mr. Newman George, Member; Mr. Renal Ajuda Singh, Member; Mr. Selwyn Lashley, Member; Mr. Joel Harding, Member; Mr. Ryan Toby, Member; Mr. George Leonard Lewis, Member; Mr. Peter Clark, Member; and Mr. Riza Salim, member. Paria, the board will now comprise Mr. Newman George, chairman, Mr. Eustace Nancis, member, Ms. Christine Sahariu, member, Mr. Peter Clark, member, and Mr. Riza Salim, member. And finally, Garakara, the board will now comprise Mr. Newman George, chairman, Mr. Anthony Chantak, member, Mr. Peter Clark, member, and Ms. Christine Sahariu, member. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. As I said, the focus will now be on heritage in terms of getting its production increased and other matters pertaining thereto. And it is in that context, I just want to cover one final point, is that that company is so important to us. And then we are faced with the challenge of Mr. Mike Wiley's illness. So we have mandated the new board to find, in the interim, a replacement CEO to continue the work over the next 6 months, in which time we will have a better feel as to what Mr. Wiley's health condition is before we take any further decision. At this point, I want to thank those who have served on the board of Trinidad Petroleum Holdings and its subsidiaries who are not in this present confederation, that we appreciate their outstanding service to Trinidad and Tobago. They have done an extremely credible job, and they have now placed the new entity on the path of success. I thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just to clarify something, the government is of the view and has been of the view, when we learned of Mr. Wiley's absence, that we have to immediately find a replacement, somebody with the same level of experience and qualifications, so that it's not going to be an interim solution, it will be a permanent solution, to find a permanent replacement for Mr. Wiley. We think the company is too important to the economy, to the country's sovereign credit rating, to allow a situation to continue where this gentleman was brought in at great expense, with high hopes, who is now, unfortunately, through no fault of his own, ill, his situation to remain in limbo. We have instructed the company that they have to fill that position immediately with a suitable replacement. I just wanted to clear that up.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I would now like to open the floor to questions.
Would offer some clarification. The last thing that Minister Khan would have said was that a replacement team would be in place for 6 months before any further decision takes place.
Let me clear that up.
Yeah.
The company sent out a press release yesterday. I don't know if you saw it. It was last night. I didn't see it myself until Minister Khan drew it to my attention. And the press release confirmed their plan that while Mr. Wiley is absent, and based on the information that became available to us a couple of weeks ago, Mr. Wiley was already absent for a month or two, and his doctors had told him that he could not return to Trinidad physically to take on the rigors of this job for a further 6 months. That's the information made available to us. So the company had proposed that in the interim, which would be an 8-month period, that the company be run by a leadership team, and they named the leadership team in a press release last night. But that is not consistent with what we as government think should be done. We felt that a company as important as this should have a replacement CEO, a subject matter expert, immediately. So I just want to clear that up. The company will not be run by any team of people over the next 6 months. We are seeking, and I think we have identified someone. I would not want to say anything just yet, because there's many a slip between the cup and the lip, but we have identified a potential replacement to come in and run the Heritage Petroleum Company. Somebody with the kind of expertise, qualifications, experience in the energy sector that is required to run a company of this importance.
When you say replacement, you mean like an acting CEO?
No, a CEO. A permanent replacement. I was very clear. I said permanent replacement. Well, that is something the company will have to sort out. The new board will have to deal with that. That's one of the mandates they will have. No, I wouldn't want to get into that. That's something for the new chairman, Mr. Commoner. He will deal with that, together with the new board.
What are these plans? He had specific plans that he put in train. I remember he had detailed some of what the company would do going forward.
Well, I would hope that whoever we bring in would build on those plans, implement them, and grow them if possible.
Once it's technically robust, there's no reason to change it. And obviously it will have an iteration with the new head. And very likely, I think we will continue along those lines.
I think on the flip side, if the government had not taken this decision to ensure that a suitable replacement is found immediately, it would have adverse implications for the financing. But now that we have made this decision, I think it will maintain confidence in the arrangements for the restructured Petrotrin. If we had not done it, there would be a problem. Because certainly someone at that level, the leader of the company, a specialized company that's dealing with oil exploration and production, to be absent from the country for 8 months doesn't make any sense. In any world, that doesn't make any sense.
I was just looking at the composition of the boards here. I was just wondering, for example, is Mr. George, is he going to still be staying on as chairman of the HDC?
Under the law, the law that governs the Housing Development Corporation, which is the Housing Development Corporation Act, the tenure of the chairman is limited to a maximum of 2 consecutive terms. So Mr. George will be completing his 2nd consecutive term at the end of this year. And therefore we had to come out anyway, by law, unless we change the law. And you don't do ad hominem changes to legislation just for one particular individual. So unfortunately, he has to come out by legislation at the end of this year. And therefore it's perfect. It's a seamless transition into another very critical, important national enterprise. So it's a good move from one to the other. So it's actually a blessing in disguise.
Is the absence of Mr. Espany from any of the boards, so is there any particular issues there with him?
Well, I must say that in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, few people in Trinidad and Tobago could have done the job that he did in restructuring the company and also securing the financing of that $850 million bond. But the restructuring is now more or less complete, and we now move into operations. So the board has done the job that we asked them to do, and it's time to move into a different phase of the company's life. So that I want to thank and congratulate Mr. Espany and his team for the fantastic job they did. It wasn't easy. There was a very tight time schedule, and it was very, very difficult. And I think one of the greatest achievements was the refinancing of that $850 million US. In fact, people say it in US, but you should really say it in TT. You're talking about over $5 billion in debt that was peacefully, quietly, and professionally restructured. It wasn't easy to get $5 billion of debt restructured without a government guarantee. And the financiers would not have agreed to that unless they had confidence in the restructuring, which is the work that Mr. Espany and his team did. So he did a fantastic job in restructuring. We're now moving into operations. There are all sorts of issues. We have to get oil production up, and there's the lease or sale of the refinery. All of these things have been done. These are all operational matters. So we want to thank them for the job they did. As I said, a brilliant job. We're now moving into operations.
Just to get back a little bit to Mr. Wiley, will he be paid his full salary for the...
Those are matters that we expect Mr. Commoner, as a very experienced attorney at law, and his team and any expertise that he would outsource to handle. That is not something that we are going to dwell on. That is something that will be addressed in the best way possible with good industrial relations practice. Our concern is getting oil production up in Heritage, because that affects our country's sovereign credit rating. If you looked at the S&P report there were two things they pulled out of there. One was gas production, and the other one was oil production. And we must get oil production back up in Heritage. If we don't, it could affect the country's sovereign credit rating. So we have to do something about it. It would be irresponsible for us as a government, given the responsibility to run this country, to have the head of that so important company out of the jurisdiction for 8 months, running the company by remote control. The question of what he will be paid, what he's entitled to, that is something that Mr. Kwame and his team will deal with.
That is a cost as well. To cut his tenure, I assume there may be legal repercussions involved. But I'm seeing an article here in The Guardian where the board says that it won't fire Wiley, but of course you just said that he's going to be permanently replaced. Is it that government trumped the decision of the board?
We have taken a decision that we can't continue with a team of people without subject matter expertise running such an important company. The question of whatever the terms and conditions of Mr. Wiley's settlement would be is a matter for Mr. Kwame and his team to deal with. They have the competence. I am not bothered that they can't handle that. Especially Mr. Kwame has a lot of practice in industrial court and in industrial relations matters. I'm sure he will handle that. But just think about it. If you think of just an increase of 5,000 barrels of oil per day, if you do the maths on that, at $60 a barrel, 5,000 barrels a day, you're going to get 300,000 US dollars additional revenue every single day. So just think about it, that if we don't make sure this company is moving, the cost of any settlement with the gentleman is insignificant in perspective compared to what we could lose in terms of oil production at the company with an absentee CEO. So it's as far as I'm concerned, it's a very rational and a very logical decision. The returns from putting in a permanent replacement far outweigh any settlement that they may have with the gentleman. Okay?
Across another topic very quickly, the Minister of the IMF Article 4 country report, we're told that there has been no contingent in Trinidad and Tobago. So just to find out from you, have they been invited? Is there some hiccup along the way?
Yes, they've been invited. We're now settling the date.
And by
What the latest communication I had with them is that they have various people who are on assignments all over the world, because the IMF is not a static organization. So they're assembling a team to come to Trinidad. The date has not been fixed yet.
2019.
Before when?
Before 2019 is up?
You have 18 months between IMF consultations. Those are the rules. Normally it takes place 12, 13 months, but you have up to 18 months between consultations. The last one was around the middle of last year.
So with the election being next year, I understand that the IMF does not come when there's during an election.
I'm not aware of that. That is what UNC did, but that's not the standard. There's no problem with them coming in an election year at all. I can assure you we don't have that problem at all. Okay?
Could we have one final question,
I
please?
just wanted to, sticking with that topic, Minister, in the absence of, if the IMF say, how important would be the information from an IMF Article 4 report, considering that we have the budget coming up just now? Is that information which they put out critical to the budget, or could you safely go to budget without having that information?
You have to understand something. Unlike Jamaica, unlike Barbados, unlike Grenada, Trinidad and Tobago is not in an IMF program. The last time we were in an IMF program was under the NAR government back in the 1980s. We are not in an IMF program. And since we are not in an IMF program, we have no obligation to do anything that the IMF might recommend. But as a member of the IMF is a group of countries. We've been a member of the IMF almost since inception. We agree as a member that there would be a Article 4 consultation on a regular basis. And when they come, they look at our economy and they advise us on what they think we should do. But because we are not in an IMF program, we are not compelled to do whatever they recommend. You will know that the IMF has been recommending for a couple of years now that we devalue the currency. We have not. We as government have taken a deliberate policy decision that we don't need to do that. And because we are not borrowing money from the IMF, we are not in a standby program, we're not in any transitional program with the IMF, we're not a basket case. So therefore, we chart our own path. The Prime Minister has made that clear, that we would take our own decisions, take our own fiscal and economic measures to avoid falling into an IMF trap where we have to borrow from the IMF. You have to understand the IMF is the lender of last resort. It's when you've gone through that you end up in an IMF program. Trinidad and Tobago is certainly nowhere close to that. And therefore, when the IMF comes, it's a consultation. That word is very important. It's simply them coming, looking at what we are doing, and making recommendations on what we should do. But we don't have to follow them. Okay?
One more question. Ravita Gopaljan, CNC3 News. Minister Khan, if you could just update us on what is the current production level at Heritage and where you all, what level you all are hoping to reach?
Mike.
At around 33,500. We are at around 33,500 to 34,000 barrels per day, which includes all Heritage's offshore land lease operators, farm outs, and incremental production service contracts. We have to go to at least 40, 41, 42,000 around 2020. Unlike the East Coast, the wells in the West Coast and on land do not produce at the rates in which the East Coast wells produce. So it's a lot of hard subsurface and a lot of hard engineering work to get 5,000 to 7,000 barrels of production. But we think if we have a robust plan of workovers, drilling, and exploration, we can very, very easily attain that target. And if we're lucky and we hit an upside in an exploration well, we could go to as high as 50,000 barrels in the coming 3 to 4 years.
Any jobs we see being created as the company moves or continues its progress?
No, since the restructuring took place, we had said Heritage will employ directly between 800 to 1,000 employees. And then that does not include contract workers, contract labor, service provider in specific areas. Because we had promised the former employees and the Southwest community in particular that this restructuring will create sustainable jobs. And it will, and it can. And that is what we're going to accelerate now.
Just one more. Did Mr. Wiley by any chance declare his illness when he was hired or when he...
We are not privy to those details. I think you as a specialist investigative reporter, I think you could handle that assignment.
Okay, thank you very much.